we could start the meeting off with everybody rising and the pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And if we could remain standing for a moment of silence to recognize the men and women of the armed forces, both domestic and abroad, who put themselves in harm's way to protect us. I would also ask you to think about the terrible loss of life we had the other day in the plane accident with plane loss over in Iran, as well as the environmental catastrophe that's happening down in Australia as we speak. We have a roll call starting from,
Drew Grisha, Commissioner of Public Works and Transportation for Westchester.
Nora Drummond, Commissioner of Planning for Westchester County.
Nick Hartman from Village of Pelham.
Rob Fleischer from the town of Newcastle.
David Gelfarb, Town Village of Harrison. Wade Hardy, White Wades.
And could the county officials also identify themselves? And airport officials?
Of course, well, I'm the noise officer.
Peter Scherer, Airport Manager.
Hal Alonso, Finance Officer.
Steve Courage, I'm a transportation planner for the county.
Sophia Meyer from the County Executive's Office.
Susan Spear, County Executive's Office.
Thank you. First up is the minutes. Does everybody have a copy of the minutes? I know they came out a little bit late since we have kind of a squeezed short window with the holidays. Does anybody have any comments on the minutes? I have some comments on the minutes. Nobody else? One on the attendance. I'm not sure if it's officially part of the minutes. I'd like to add Eric Nicolason from the general public from the town of Newcastle. On page, it's number 3, little b, number 3, about VRFF operations. I believe that we commented, we talked here about that during most nights in October, runway 1634 was closed for construction. I think we talked about other months where the runway has been closed at night as well. What were those months? It shows up in the graph pretty dramatically.
Closures were started in May, and they terminated in the beginning of November.
I think we should, I thought we talked, I'd like if we could add that into the minutes so we don't end up comparing apples to oranges in other years for what happened this year. The last one, D, public questions. We talked about the impact of the air noise button. At the end of that discussion, I asked a question about whether or not you had found that there had been any problems with any of the complaints logged by the air noise button, and you said that there were not. I wanted that to have reflected in the minutes. That's it, that's all I had. I really have no specific, actually with that, with those changes. Do we have a motion to adopt the minutes? Is there a second?
I'll second.
All those in favor of adopting the minutes for December with those changes, say aye.
Aye.
It's unanimous. For the chair's update and comments right now, I don't really have any specific comments, so I'm going to push forward with the meeting. We have a lot to cover. The first thing which is the election of board officers for 2020. 2019, Peter Schlackis served as chair. I served as vice chair. In communications with the various members of the board, we asked if anybody else was interested. In those communications, nobody evidenced that they were interested in serving in one of those capacities. Peter and I both said that we would be open to serving in these capacities again for this year. I just wanted to formally ask again if anybody has any interest.
So you should accept nominations.
Right.
That's the proper procedure.
Does anybody have any nominations that they want to make?
So
Sorry?
you're accepting nominations for what position?
For chair.
Okay.
And well, I can for vice chair. Does it make a
Start with
difference?
start with the chair. You should accept a nomination for a specific position.
Does it make a difference which one goes first?
Well, normally the chair would run the meeting, so you should start with the chair.
So, for the chair, I can nominate, right?
Mm-hmm.
I nominate Peter Schlackis. Is there a second? I have proxies that allow me to,
That would be your second.
okay, from Peter, allowing
Okay.
me
Fine.
to nominate him, that would be a second.
Okay.
Any other nominations? All those in favor of,
I'll nominate, I'd like to nominate Nicholas Hartman for chair.
do I have to ask if he accepts?
You can ask for a second. You can ask for a second.
Okay. Is there a second?
Can I second myself?
I'll second.
Yeah.
I'll second.
Wait a second.
All those, so, is there any other nominations? Then,
You're going to call the question.
Call
You're
the
going to call
vote.
the
All the votes, who do I ask for first?
the first nomination.
All those in favor of Peter Schlackis, please raise your hand.
And you have proxies for who?
I have proxies for Tracy and for Peter.
So you're casting those proxies for Peter.
They are for Peter, they weren't discretionary, they were for Peter.
Okay.
Okay? All right. All those for Mr. Hartman?
Excuse me, I want to be clear that I, at a minimum, am going to abstain, and I believe,
Is there a quorum? Then I will check. Yeah.
yeah, so, because the county has to work with whoever's going to be the chair, so Hugh and I are both going to abstain.
Well, abstain.
There are 4 other votes, so it looks like they're gonna, that Nick is the new chair. We're not gonna move right over right now.
Well, you have to take a vote.
Right. Okay, people could abstain, yes. All those in favor of Nick Hartman?
I vote for Nick Hartman. I have a proxy from Salvatore M. Crescenzi as well.
I don't know, who
He's
says
the new member
as of when?
as of today.
As of January 3rd, actually.
January
It's a
3rd.
Friday.
I don't have notes, so.
He was filling the position for the town of Rye, or I guess he's
Uh,
out large.
Kremen's
Kremen's
seat.
position.
Kremen's resigned.
Nick Hartman is the new. Congratulations. The rest of the meeting's up to you.
Before we do the vice chair, I would like to thank Rob and Peter very much for their service to the board this last year. I know it's at times a thankless position and it's a lot of work. And sometimes these meetings are difficult to cover, so I do thank you very much, and we'll look forward to continue working with you and Peter this year and beyond, so thank you very much.
Thank you, and I just asked if you just speak up just a bit.
Yes, and I don't entirely know what I'm doing, so if I do mess up, please call me out. If I make a mistake, it's not intentional. So I think we need to do vice chair now. So open nominations for the position of vice chair for 2020. I would nominate David Gelfard if he's interested in that position.
Yes, I would accept the nomination, thank you.
Is there a second for David Gelfard?
I'll second David.
Any other nominations for?
Again, we're gonna, Hugh and I were both staying.
Okay. And do you have any nominations through your
I
proxies?
have proxies. Let's see what my discretion is to go to them. It just has there's no nominating here, it just has who they vote for.
And then,
That can be a nomination.
so you can put forth one of those proxies or yourself as whoever they are whoever they would like to vote for. Somebody has to nominate them, and that proxy can count as a nomination. These proxies should all be, though, handed in to the person collecting the
Well,
minutes.
They came very late.
That's fine, I just emailed them.
Nancy sent no proxy, she showed up. We just got that today.
So use one of them as a motion, if you don't wish to make the motion yourself.
No motion. Because I'm gonna turn it down.
Okay.
Any other nominations for position of vice chair? Hearing none, all in favor for David Gelfard for vice chair for 2020?
And I vote Mr. Crescenzi's proxy as well.
Any opposed? Abstaining with 3 abstentions? Okay.
No.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
All right, so that's that business out of the way. So the next item on the agenda, we have a public comment period, which usually we have this reserved for items not on our agenda this evening. Immediately following the public comment period, we're going to be having a presentation by the Westchester County Joint Waterworks, and we'll have time for the public to ask questions related to that presentation. But if there's any other comments or questions or comments that any member of the public wishes to make at this time, not related to those items, this would be a good time to do so. Anybody wish to take the opportunity? No? Okay, thank you. So with that, let's proceed on to the presentation for this evening, which I believe is from Paul.
Clancy.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Welcome, Paul. From Westchester County Joint Waterworks. So, over to you. Thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Good evening. My name is Paul Cutsey. I'm manager of Westchester Joint Waterworks. And first of all, I would like to thank the Airport Advisory Board for giving me the opportunity to give a presentation on Westchester Joint's proposed filtration facility to be sited adjacent to Westchester County Airport. Along with me tonight from Westchester Joint Waterworks is Mayor Belmont, trustee, David Birdsall, business director, Terry O'Neill, general superintendent, and Frank Carcara, chief operator. Also along with me to help me with the presentation is from representatives from our design consultant, Hazen and Sawyer, Mr. Richard Peters, vice president, and Eileen Feldman, associate vice president. But before I begin this presentation, I was asked to speak about a sampling program, sampling effort that we're currently involved with, having to do with PFOAs and PFOSs. And at the request of the County Executive's Office, Westchester Joint Waterworks began performing rural water sampling for PFOA and PFOSs at our Rylake source on a quarterly basis, given recent attention and general concerns regarding possible presence of PFOA and PFOS in drinking water, and given the proximity of Rylake to Westchester County Airport, and that PFOA and PFOS monitoring requirements were expected from the New York State Department of Health in coming months. But I believe to date, the state has not come out with monitoring requirements. Just a little background on PFOA and PFOSs. PFOA and PFOSs are fluorinated organic chemicals that are part of a larger group of chemicals referred to as perfluoroalkyl substances, or PFASs. PFOA and PFOSs have been the most extensively produced and studied of these chemicals. They've been used to make carpets, clothing, fabrics for furniture, paper packaging for food, and other materials, such as cookware, that are resistant to water, grease, and stains. They're used for firefighting at airfields and a number of industrial processes. And then the source of that information is from the US EPA, PFOA, and PFOS Drinking Water Health Advisories fact sheet. What this is here is what I took was one of the analysis report of one of our samples to identify the 14 compounds that we're actually sampling for. Two of those compounds is PFOA and PFOSs. Along with those two are another 12 compounds. Next slide. This is the PFOA and PFO sampling results to date. Our quarterly sampling began in June of 2019. Since then, we've completed 3 samples, and all of those samples have been below the detectable limit. There was also another sample done prior to this current effort back in March of 2018, and we did that as a result of a concerned constituent, water ratepayer in Westchester County. Now, just to put it in perspective, you're looking at over to the far right, there's units shown for those samples, and UGL is micrograms per liter. The first 3 samples are in terms of micrograms per liter. And recently, the last report, just to confuse things, they changed the units to nanograms per liter. And all that meant was now the little decimal point was moved over 3 points, 3 spots. But it's essentially the same measurement, or the same detectable limit. And to put it in perspective, microgram per liter, 1 microgram per liter would be equivalent to 1 part per billion, or 1 drop of water in a swimming pool. And 1 nanogram per liter is 1 part per trillion, which is equivalent to 1 grain of sand in an Olympic-sized swimming pool. Just to put it in perspective, how tiny, what we're dealing with here. Now to our presentation. And over to the right is a site plan. It was actually a overview of Westchester County Airport. And this little brown square there is Westchester Joint's proposed filtration facility. Overview Westchester Joint Waterworks, for those of you who aren't familiar with our water system. We're a non-profit public benefit corporation consisting of member municipalities of the Village of Mamaroneck, Town of Mamaroneck, and the Town Village of Harrison. We also supply water on a retail basis to portions of City of Ryan, City of New Rochelle, serving a total retail population of approximately 60,000 persons to approximately 15,000 service connections. We also sell water on a wholesale basis to the Village of the Village of Larchmont, and Suez Water Westchester, which serves Portchester, Rye, and whom am I missing?
Preston,
And
Rye.
Rye. Westchester Joint Water Works is supplied by the New York City Department of Environmental Protection water system at Rye Lake, Kensico Reservoir, and at Shaft 22 of the Delaware Aqueduct. Now, just to give you a little bit of background regarding our filtration facility, the U.S. EPA Surface Water Treatment Rule requires that all water systems with surface water sources provide filtration. In 1999, there was an injunction from the New York State Attorney General to require Westchester Joint to construct a water filtration facility at our Rye Lake water source. In 2004, there was a court order from the New York State Supreme Court to construct a water filtration plant by December 2008. December 2008, December 2008 came and went without construction of the plant. I don't have a whole heck of a lot of details about that other than it just didn't go forward. Following that, going from 2009 to 2016, Westchester Joint worked with New York State Department of Health in exploring compliance alternatives to filtration. In 2016, Westchester Joint met with Westchester County Airport regarding potential siting for a filtration facility. However, it really wasn't until 2017 when Westchester Joint became committed to construction of a filtration plant and working with Westchester County and exploring site viability at Westchester County Airport. 2019, July 11, 2019, the U.S. EPA issued an administrative order requiring Westchester Joint to submit plans within 30 days to address the long-standing violation of the surface water filtration requirement. And most recently, in November of 2019, the U.S. EPA issued another administrative order requiring Westchester Joint to commence design of the proposed Rye Lake filtration facility and begin the seeker process by January 31st, 2020, with the filtration facility operational by October 15th, 2024. Okay, and from this point, I'm going to hand off to Eileen Delzin of Hastings Sawyer.
Thanks, Paul. So now I'm going to get into a few more details about the work that we've been doing since regarding this site at the airport. On the left is the same image that we had on the cover slide with the filtration plant proposed location over here along Purchase Street, between Tower Road and Purchase Street. On the right-hand side, we have a zoomed-in location map of the proposed planning. What you can see in the brown box is the proposed filtration facility, and the box around it in white is the approximate finished area that we would need surrounding that for things like stormwater, parking, access. We're looking at proposing to get to this site not from Purchase Street itself, but allowing that to remain undeveloped and come in from Tower Road. There's an existing gate down here next to your electrical substation. There's a gate and a dirt access road along the secondary fence line. That fence line you can see is where the dashed line is, and we're proposing that as the access up to the site. This would preserve the 100-foot Purchase Street setback, which is a Harrison ordinance, and it also preserves the trees, the existing stone wall, and the visual cover between the road and the proposed treatment plant. This site is a chosen site. It is an ideal location because of its location between some of Westchester Joint Water Works' existing infrastructure. The water source is the Rye Lake pump station, which sits on the side of 684. You can see it right when you're driving southbound. That's the pump station itself that takes water from Rye Lake, from the Kensico Reservoir. And there's a pipeline that runs down this orange line straight south on Purchase Street to the Purchase Street storage tanks. From a treatment standpoint, you want to have the water between the raw water location and where you pump it out to your customers. So from that perspective, to be able to cut into this existing pipeline along here go right to the treatment plant and come back out is minimizing, putting this in a great location hydraulically and also a place that makes a lot of sense from an infrastructure standpoint. So over the course of the summer into the fall, we worked with the airport to do some additional investigations of the site to make sure that it was a viable site that was appropriate for siting a piece of infrastructure like a treatment plant. One thing that we've looked at first was wetlands disturbance. What you see on the right-hand side are some existing wetland maps provided by DEC and others that show that this proposed site in the dashed area is outside of any wetlands area. We also conducted outreach to SHPO, the State Office of Historic Preservation, the Historic Office of the State, and they determined that they wanted us to go back out and do some additional archaeological investigation. We did that. We had a field crew go out and take several samples, take a look at historic documents. The determination at the end of that study was that there's no archaeological or historical artifacts or items there that would create any issue with the project moving forward at the site. So the determination was that there's no impact to these resources. As I said earlier, we're looking at the access from from Tower Road, not Purchase Street. I would maintain the existing stone wall. The site itself is relatively flat. There's a small slope, but it is a relatively flat area. There are a significant number of trees there. The goal would be to minimize tree removal to only what is needed to construct this facility. We are aware that it's within Kensico Reservoir watershed, so there would be additional stormwater controls that are required from New York City DEP that would be factored in and included in the project. So a few more details about the building itself. We're looking at an approximate finished footprint of a 1 acre building and the finished site surrounding it on a 3 to 5 acre area. This finished area would include the parking, access, stormwater controls that are required. We maintain the stone wall and the setback with the trees and the access, as I said, along Tower Road. One thing that we wanted to present to you tonight was some specific impacts to the airport or lack thereof. The proposed site is outside of the existing secondary fence line for the airport, so not the primary security fence, the secondary one. The location, the height of the building wouldn't impact airport operations. It's well below the tree line in that area. And there's not any noise anticipated to be generated from the site. It's a drinking water plant, and it does not have noise related to it. In terms of site impacts, the way the secondary fence line is set up right now is that there's a secondary fence, and then there is a dirt access road along the fence line so that your security personnel can monitor that area. What we'd be proposing to do is moving the fence to the opposite side of that road so that that could be used as the access and it would be outside of any airport operations. So there'd also need to be some fencing adjustments down near the electric substation to allow access to this treatment plant without interfering with airport operations. It's expected that when the treatment facility is operational, there would be approximately 4 automobile trips per day and approximately 5 truck trips per month. Some of the recent site investigations that we conducted, we did a wetlands investigation, as I mentioned. We also looked at natural resources. We looked at endangered species. We looked at all the different trees that were on the site. None of these are endangered species. These are trees that are kind of a second growth forest there. We took a look at contamination and historic use of the site. As I said, the archaeological feedback was that there's no impact to resources. We're still awaiting some sampling results from some groundwater and soil sampling that we did at the site. We've also done a preliminary geotechnical program with just a few borings to get a better understanding of the soil conditions and the ground conditions. And to date, we found large boulders and glacial till. So that's a summary of what we have found at the site, and now to open it to any other comments from Paul or to the board for questions.
Hi, is there going to be any secret analysis?
I think you should recognize him.
Oh, sorry about that, my bad. My bad, but it is. Yes, is there going to be a secret analysis?
Yes, yes.
And what is the contemplated timetable for that?
According to the consent order, that needs to be initiated by January 31st of this year.
Who's gonna be the lead agency?
But
Westchester Joint Waterworks.
Are you gonna be lead agency?
Yes.
And when will a scoping document be, be forthcoming?
I don't have the timeline put together. The first step is establishing lead agency formally. So that's what we did first, the first step.
You know, if I may, we would anticipate the scoping document would be sometime by the spring. It would need to move pretty quickly, so we don't think it's a matter of months.
And will there be any, how would the public get access to these documents?
Public access to the secret documents typically, Rich, maybe you can.
I'm not sure I have the best answer for you. Certainly, the Westchester Joint plans to follow the secret process. We're starting with establishment of lead agency and then follow the steps after that. So I don't have a specific answer to your question. We do know, in having done SECRA for water facilities of this sort, certainly the focus is always associated with the time during the construction activities. That is what really is, if there's any impacts at all, that's where the discussion really lies. As Eileen had mentioned, once the facility is in operation, there's very little activity and very little from the secret perspective. But
Yeah, and I don't imagine you get alternative sites, things like that, alternative use of the site. But I didn't realize that the Joint Waterworks can act as a lead agency. So how would you be holding hearings? How would you be, where would public comment? Where would people comment? How would you kind of like that going on?
If I recall, the public documents are available, I think, within the three communities, Harrison and Town of Marinette and Town and Village. That was how it was, yeah.
But are you coordinating the review? I think that might be what David Gelfarb is getting at, is that, are you coordinating review in that you're going to be involving the agencies who obviously have an interest, County Board of Legislators, County Department of Health, what other agencies are involved? Because we would then have an opportunity to provide you comments based on our knowledge, certainly, of what's there.
There's both involved and interested agencies.
Okay.
Okay, and the County of Westchester would be an involved agency.
The County of Westchester, multiple agencies, as you,
Yes.
well, you would know, Department of Health, Board of Legislators, because this ultimately is gonna require Board of Legislators action if it gets that far.
As well as
Okay.
the local municipalities.
Okay.
My last question would be, where would there be, when or where would there be public meetings where the public could comment as opposed to submitting written comments if the public so chose?
We'd identify the right place, a public place at the time to make that happen.
And have you done these before, say in village halls, or where have you
I
conducted these?
believe that was where it had been done previously.
Yes.
We've done them for other entities in similar settings.
Other questions from the board?
No, it'd also be posted on the county airport site. I mean, there's a number of, that wouldn't be the primary, but we could offer that. But is it a planning board action with the town, or no? There's no,
Are you looking to lease land or swap land?
Oh, at this point, okay, we're jumping all over the place.
Yeah.
We're moving, but did we wrap up our questions on secret?
I'm fine.
Okay.
Well, that does relate to secret, because in terms of whose action it is.
Oh, I see.
If it's a lot line realignment, it may require
Yes.
approval from a planning
Okay.
board. That's where I'm
Yeah,
getting.
as far as that goes, that's evolving.
Okay,
Okay.
all right, okay.
But,
because that would solve
what
that.
that is, when we expressed interest in having discussions regarding the potential of siting our filtration facility adjacent to Westchester County Airport, Westchester County, inquired about what we were doing with our original parcel that we had planned to site our filtration plant, and expressed interest in securing that parcel. Likely, there would involve some sort of land swap. That would be logical. But we haven't even begun discussing the details of that.
Okay.
Well, I mean, would that swap be done as a part of this? I mean, once your, super process is underway and you're going as time goes on, I mean, first,
Let me just, first I'll show you where the area that we're talking about. I give this right here, right here. This is where the plant was originally going to be sited, and just didn't work out. And you can see where it's located, right up against the airport, there. To answer your question, this land swap, land transfer, development of this facility here does not hinge on a land swap or a land transfer. It just happens to be up at this point, the county had expressed interest, and it seemed that the logical thing to do, possibly, like the likelihood of a land swap.
So, in other words, then, this, or that parcel that you just pointed out would potentially have, you know, be given to the county or for
Yeah.
airport purposes, would sort of
Right.
have something.
Exactly.
And there's no thought has been really given yet, has there been any as to what airport-related functions that land would serve?
I can't speak to
It would be
that.
more like a conservation easement, I would think. I don't see anything.
Yeah, I'm not
proposed.
sure it would be limited to airport uses.
Yeah, exactly.
At a minimum, I understood because of the location of it, that the county would like control of it. That's where you start.
Right.
Okay, and then you go from there.
It serves as a buffer to the airport.
Other questions from the board?
I think my own last, what are you looking for at this point in time? You're just advising us that this is, you've started your process because you have a legal obligation to do so? So if this is.
We're meeting because given, although it's not, I would say technically on the airport property or within the, the controlled area of the airport, it is adjacent to it. So we figured at a minimum, the Airport Advisory Board would have an interest.
Okay. Thank you.
I had actually just one brief question about the PFOS testing, the numbers. You're talking about the units and the micrograms
Oh,
versus
yeah.
the nanograms. It looked like at the last one, in addition to changing the units, it was a lower sensitivity, so it appears the sensitivity is actually divided in half as well, is that?
Yeah, yeah, it's
So
amazing.
the test is now even more sensitive
Yes.
than it had been in the past?
Yes.
Because it's half, if I'm reading it right,
Yeah.
that would be, so it would be equivalent to .002 instead of.
Exactly, that's exactly what it would be.
Okay. So even at that lower level, they have.
Right, we're still coming up with no detects.
Thank you very much
Thank you.
for joining us.
Thank you.
Any questions, oh, sorry, I should ask before I left, any questions from the public? I did promise to give that so that we can allow them to leave. Thank you very much. So next item on our agenda is the airport manager's report.
Okay, thanks. Everybody knows what happened over the, on Friday and Thursday with the attack in Iran. Because of that, it initiated a security response by the airport to bring 3 parties together, the airport, TSA, and also the county police, to go over what protocols we may have to do and to get intel from Homeland Security to see what provisions we need to do to protect the airport and protect the surrounding community. So we put those in play, can discuss that, of course. Holiday travel, we had a holiday travel, very successful holiday travel. We had good weather conditions, so that was nice, and everything went flawlessly. We actually had a guitarist that we hired to actually play music. That was well received by the public. In fact, the public actually came up and sang Christmas songs. And one person actually asked to play the other guitar, and actually, they had a jamming session down there. So it was kind of interesting. And then we had another event, we had Sony come in, a Sony representative come in and bring in an artificial dog, which is called Aibo. And that artificial dog is, you can go online and see what Aibo is, but we had 2 dogs in there. One was named Aibo, which means companion in Japanese, and the other one was named Rocky. So they had that, they did the demonstrations down at the departure lounge. A lot of the kids came up and petted Aibo and Rocky and interacted, and the other dogs interacted with them. And then we actually put them out and they danced to the guitar music. So, and they filmed all this for Sony, so that was kind of nice. Just you know, we got some numbers in for the end of the year. Just to give you an idea, we've done 357,000 check bags, which is an increase of about 3.5% over last year. So people are checking their bags, which is nice. Wheelchair service, which is interesting, we had 24,864 wheelchairs. That was an increase of about 4.8%. And daily average, we do about 74 wheelchairs on daily average. That's up about 13.5%. We had one day during the holiday that we did close to 90 wheelchairs in one day. So we're getting a lot of those things. Also bird strikes, we ended the year with 46 bird strikes. That's down from 63 bird strikes from last year. Either that we're flying a little safer or we killed most of the birds off. I'm sure that there's still a lot of birds. Those are some of the numbers that we're generating in this of interest. So, and then the rest of it is in our activity report. So, go ahead.
You actually raised an interesting point for the consultants that they should be aware of. You have a very strict wildlife management plan. They need to be aware of that if they're thinking of operating anywhere close to the airport, that any employees can't discard garbage, or they have to be very careful that they're not leaving anything that's going to encourage wildlife.
I'm glad you bring that up,
All
because
right.
one of the things to access the airport that they have to do
Yeah.
is, number one, they're gonna have to be security badged, and number two, they have to participate in our ISO program, our environmental management program, which includes all of that. And that's a
Okay,
big
yeah,
point.
they're gonna
Yeah.
need to know that, because the
Yeah.
last thing you want is them bringing in food, and, you know, because some contractors coming in and, you know, it's lunchtime and they drop
Yeah.
something, and
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
suddenly we've got more birds or
Yeah,
or
no,
whatever.
that's a good point, and I look at those things, but that's a good point to bring up, so they're aware of that.
Other questions for Peter? Thanks, thank you, Peter.
Mm-hmm.
Next item up will be the activity and noise monitoring report from Chris. And just as Chris is bringing it up, I think it was mentioned at the last meeting, because we moved our meeting schedule from the ends of the month towards the beginning of the month, we may have a slight gap in some of the reporting, which will eventually catch up.
Operations for November of 2019, the airport had a total of 12,296 operations. And that's an increase of 789 operations over November of 2018. Year-to-date operations for 2019 through the end of November were 141,886. That's up 889 operations from 2018, when it was 140,988. The breakdown by aircraft category, I see corporate aviation in November, of 2019 accounted for a total of 6,344 operations. That's down 638 operations from last year. Year-to-date corporate operations are 77,044, which is down 218 from last year. Airline operations for November were 2,054. That's up from 1,671 last year. Year-to-date airline operations are 22,352, up from 20,283 in 2000.
I'm sorry, Chris, the other some numbers that you're talking about I see on here, other numbers I don't.
The breakdowns.
The 70,000 corporate operations?
That's the year-to-date. This is only the month.
Okay, got it, okay.
Light general aviation traffic for the month of November, there was 3,896, up from 2,854 last year. That further breaks down the increase. We had an increase of 516 more touch and go operations, an increase of 838 based light general aviation operations, and a decrease of 312 transient light general aviation. Operations during the voluntary restraint from flying period for November, we had a total of 189 in VERF operations. That's an average of 6.3 per night. That's down from 251 last year. Here, by time breakdown between midnight and 6 and 12:30 a.m., that's 0.6 operations per day, a 1.9 operations per night between 12:31 a.m. and 5:59 a.m., and 3.8 per night between 6 a.m. and 6:30 a.m. Noise complaints. In the month of November, we received a total of 12,012 noise complaints from 89 households. We had 50 households that submitted 10 or more complaints. Our lead caller submitted 1,807 complaints from Armonk. And during the voluntary restraint from flying time period, we had a total of 207 noise complaints. 161 of them were related to Westchester traffic. 29 of them we identified as being air traffic using other area airports, and 17 we were not able to identify any aircraft in the area at the time given. There were a total of 19 communities, 16 in New York and 3 in Connecticut. And here is we have the top 25 jet aircraft type based on max landing weight for November of 2019. Are there any questions?
What does the B stand for? Is that Boeing or something else?
In which particular
aircraft type?
Yes, so that would be Boeing. Boeing 757-200, 737-800, 737-400, and 717.
Is the 752 just by any chance a typo? I mean, I never heard of 752. That's a
It's the
Boeing.
757-200. Okay, that's the designation that it gets in the computer.
Sure. Okay. Can you go back, Chris, can you go back all the way to the first page? Is there a page before that? Okay. I'm looking at the noise monitor. And you mentioned the airline operations were up to 2,000. They were basically up 25% year over year, close, 20%. How many days in November are there no restrictions, TUA restrictions?
It's about, for Thanksgiving weekend, it's about 5 days.
Is that what it counts? Because you would think the TUA, you couldn't have that large of a move.
First of all, on those holiday restrictions, we're not getting extra airplanes in. Basically what happens on Thanksgiving is we actually get less airplanes because the business aircraft have the option where they actually, I know 2 of them have not flown during that period because they're mostly business flights to Chicago, and they basically elected not to fly because there was no demand. Most of the demand is for the Florida flights, Chicago flights to transfer out, but when you see those days, there's like 67 days that they don't count the passenger loads.
Right.
There's not this all of a sudden spike, everything's just like spike where all of a sudden everybody's flying in here. That's not the case. It's pretty much normal. What we're getting is more of a different type of traveler. We're getting the flights that are full, and we're getting a different type of traveler, more of a vacation traveler. Like for instance, when we did the Christmas time, there's 20 days during the Christmas period. That's the long one. What we're getting is a different type of traveler. We're getting one with a lot of kids, a lot of wheelchairs. We talked about the wheelchairs. We're also getting.
But just to
Okay.
focus on, I don't.
Okay, all right.
I don't want you to answer the
Yeah,
question.
okay.
I don't want to have everybody's time. But then how does, if our slots fairly well used up, be it out under the T-way?
Well, there's slots available. There's still slots that an airline could pick. Not every slot is filled. We're probably only filled maybe less than, probably around 40%.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
I did not know that.
Yeah, but the thing is that the 240 passengers per half hour restricts them also the fact that there's only 2 large slots available in a half-hour period. And also that people don't want to fly during the, 3 o'clock in the morning, keeps the numbers down. But No, there was no increase in flights over the holidays. The only thing you look at is whether there was any weather delays or no weather delays, which we had over the holiday period. We had no weather delays.
So if I were to say, to summarize, the reason why there's a difference year over year is because there's lots of extra capacity under the existing T-way,
Extra capacity?
extra slots.
The slots are extra capacity, but they don't use, in other words, they're not using those slots. They still have to bid on the slot. They can't just all of a sudden arbitrarily go into a slot. The flights are the same, they're just exactly the same.
But I'm seeing 20% more flights. And in a world where you passenger or air, you would think there wouldn't be that, but they're
Yeah.
20% up.
Yeah, I'd have to look at the numbers.
To be answered.
Sure, you guys check out.
Yeah, we'll check it out.
Might be behind the
Yeah.
20%.
I inquired John about his continued kind of strange kind of transition between based operations and transient operations. And I'm still not sure we have any explanation of why based operations seem to be up dramatically this year, almost 50%, and transient operations are down. And from what I can tell so far, the number of based aircraft hasn't changed.
No, not that I can tell. We'd have to look into it and see if there's any change. But, you know, there can be an increase in based airplanes. If an airplane leaves and it's a larger airplane and a smaller airplane comes in, there may be room for two smaller airplanes to base. We'd have to take a look at the
How many
base list.
do you know how many base flight aircraft we have right now?
I can't spit out the number. I have to look it up.
Has it, do you believe it's increased a lot
I
since
don't know.
last
I have to
year?
look it up. So that'd be a question.
Can we have those for follow-up questions for next? Because that permeates for both corporate operations and light GA. Touch and go is also up kind of dramatically, doubled up. Is that just kind of a measure of
We've had
good weather?
We've had a very mild till fall.
Okay.
Also, you're going to see more light GA operations than you would if there was lousy weather.
There's also an uptick in flight training, and that's because because of the fact there's a shortage of pilots, so people are picking career to be pilots, and so the flight schools have had a huge increase in people wanting to do flight training.
In terms of counting the touch and goes for operations, at some point in time when the airport had put up a runway analysis, you would discuss that touch and goes were counted differently prior to 2016. Could you go over again how they were done prior to 2016 and now?
What I was most likely referring to is the numbers that you see in the airport monitor. That methodology in there has never changed. Those have always been counted the same way. But what I was most likely referring to at that time was the runway analysis that's produced by ANOMS. ANOMS will counts radar tracks. It doesn't count if you have somebody doing touch and go after touch and go after touch and go after touch and go. When we do the count using the flight scripts from the tower, that gets counted as 1, 2, 3, 4. When ANOMS is looking at that at radar track, if it is a continuous radar track, no matter how many times they go around the pattern, it's only going to count that as one operation. That's why we don't use that number where that comes out of ANOMS for counting touch and goes.
So the numbers here that are printed in the noise monitor report, they come out of ANOMS absent touch and
No.
goes.
Well, you'd have to ask John about that. John is the one who prepares that, not me.
Okay. I'd like to once again just reference, as we go through these these flights during voluntary restraint periods, I don't think there's a lot of use in going through this now. They need to all be highlighting that the fact that as another month passes, we're not comparing last year to this year at all, given the fact that how many nights was the was the runway closed down?
The runway was closed down from May and it ended in the beginning of November. Now, they didn't work, they only worked 5 days a week. So they're only 5 days a week that is closed during that time. It was also open when there's bad weather. They would cancel certain times that they worked. They also canceled a lot during holiday periods. So there were different times that they worked. So again, we would have to add up each day that they worked and total that up and say, okay, this could be a correlation to how many days and how many hours the runway was closed that couldn't be used by somebody. But you also have to remember that runway 1129 was still open, and that was still active by like GA and some of the corporate operators. So you'd have to factor that in also. And there was only a short period of time that both runways were closed. Plus you have helicopter activity. Even though both runways are closed, you still get helicopter activities coming in and out.
Right, but only planes less than 12,500 pounds could possibly use 1129.
So we have to factor all those things in.
And was the number of noise complaints, was that a new record?
Yes.
What's that? Let me make sure.
Well, yes, for November, that was a record for a month, and for both November and any month.
All time, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And no anomalies were found with any kind of the usage of any coming in?
No.
Okay. That's it for now. Thank you very much.
And it's probably a good point to remind people that, and I don't know the exact date, but later this month, we have the FAA Town Hall.
The
22nd.
It's not a town hall, it's a.
Or sorry, not town hall, the
Open
the
house.
open house, sorry. And so that's definitely an opportunity to come and speak to representatives of the FAA on issues particularly related to the noise complaints and the flight paths and
Has a location been picked for that?
Yes, it's the community center in Chappaqua, it's 10 Center Street.
You want to talk about that now?
Oh,
We should probably bring it up at
6 p.m.
Make sure we touch on
What town was that located?
Chappaqua.
Chappaqua.
6
That was
p.m.
Newcastle.
And I think the next item on the agenda is Hugh on the public.
So I'll just go over the capital projects. Right now, there's no activity with construction at the airport, but we're in between seasons on runways, 1634. We're going to resume sometime in May with the paving operation. Last summer, we were able to put in the lights for the center line and cut in new conduit because there's all new LED lights out there, the latest standards, more safety improvements. And we're doing that, we do that ahead of time of paving, that way we can have one continuous pave once we start. We're gonna be paving all through next summer into the fall. In the fall, there'll be grooving done at the airport, which also helps with the drainage on the runway. So that project will continue all the way through next fall and will be completed sometime in October. See, the taxiway L, that's in design, 1129 between taxiway C. That's going to be done in 2022, mainly for funding. I mean, pretty much the $22 million 1634 project has kind of encumbered our funding for the next couple of years. So that is in design, but we've kind of put that on hold. And this, with Breeze survey analysis of obstructions, that's basically a tree survey. It's an aerial survey that they have their glide path that comes in, it's parabolic shape, and if the tree extends through that, something has to be done, it has to be removed. If it's not, then the length of your runway has to be shortened. So under a continuous basis, we're always out there checking. Right now that's about 99% done, that study. We're just ground truthing a couple of the trees, literally going out there and measuring a couple of trees to see where they are, because some of those obstructions are close, and it's one thing, we want to have everything clear out there for the right length of the runway. That's where we stand on that.
On that point of There were some trees that were cut down, I guess it was across the, across 120. I saw some pictures of that. Were those cut, do you know why those were cut down, if you can comment on that?
Those were actually, that's the approach to runway 16, so they were encroaching in the flight path area, so we trimmed them back. And they'll actually, we had an arborist take a look at them. They look kind of ugly right now, but they will
Yeah,
actually
it's
start to,
wintertime.
they will start to crown again, and they'll start to make new branches, but
So those remain healthy and
yeah,
vibrant?
it's because when we do that, we make sure that an arborist takes a look at it and tells us whether to remove it or not to remove it. So
Some trees can be topped, some can't.
Yeah.
Top, some trees, they die, so.
I
Yeah.
understand.
So we did it probably about 8 years ago. Looked like that, and then all of a sudden they started to crown again, and they actually came back to a nicer shape.
How much was taken off those trees?
Usually we take off about, we usually try to go to what the level is, and then try to go at least 5 feet below that to allow for a certain amount of growth. But again, it's right on the approach for 116.
Those were all good, thank you.
Any other questions for? Okay, thank you. And at this time, we take any public questions related to any of the reports we just heard on the airport or noise reports or projects, etc. Thank you. Moving on to unfinished business, there's these continual questions about the additional metrics, I believe. Rob, do you want to articulate which these items these were on the, I think it was the back reporting of on the airport monitor? Is that what this is in reference to?
I think it was the follow-up for HMMH.
Okay.
Yeah, I just have to bring it up. That number.
I guess while we're waiting, is there any update from the county on the engagement with HMMH or anything to announce?
Yes, they're updating the noise contours as per your request, and they're going to also be developing some recommendations for phase 2, which we would welcome your input.
Okay, great. So Rob, do you have your?
And I would just also say that the recommendation, the resolution that you passed last month was forwarded to the FAA.
Great.
We wanted to make sure they got it in time for the January 22nd meeting.
That's great. And is there anything while we're waiting as well you can just say about the format or what will happen at the meeting? I know there's been some questions about what will happen at the meeting.
Sure. Well, I'm meeting with them next Wednesday to finalize things, but as I understand it, they're going to have sort of a poster board type session
Yeah.
where people can walk around and talk with the FAA on an individual basis. So not
like different stations.
Exactly, different stations with different information concepts. So one about air traffic control, one about flight patterns. So just different ways to inform the public about how air traffic control is conducted and why certain flights are coming in certain directions. And then HMMH will also be there as well, and we'll probably have some other just general information about the airport.
Okay,
So it's a good opportunity for one-on-ones with the public rather than a town hall type meeting.
Yeah, sorry. It's down.
Because the FAA is very insistent upon that.
Yeah,
so
no.
I was like,
Understood.
So let's start with that. In terms of the town hall,
Yeah.
how many people can be accommodated, or are there to talk to people at one time?
well, it's 6 to 8, I believe. It's an open house, so it's just as people walk around. If people linger, it'd be less. If people move along, we can accommodate whoever shows up.
Is there a time limit for people to talk to? And I guess
No.
So
Nope.
if 200 people show up as number, what did the other 192 people do while 8 people are talking to people?
Well, there'll be a variety of stations, so you can just walk from station to station.
And just
So
kind
if
of
one station is
read what's
busy,
there?
you can go to the next station and then come back to the other one when it's not busy.
In that format, you're generally hearing a conversation that they're already doing, so you're learning something that you might have asked from somebody else.
So are the one-on-ones public or private? I don't really have a feeling.
Public,
They're
public
like an open
with a,
house.
with a
Yeah,
board.
like, like an
They're in each of the
People are in
stations.
front of the.
So people are around you.
Yeah, so I'm sure there'll be other people interjecting. Could you explain that more?
I don't know.
Well,
That's
that's the way I would see it.
Yeah.
I haven't seen one.
No, I wouldn't see it would be a sit-down one-on-one.
Okay.
So on the HMMH noise report, we discussed last time at this meeting some initial things. We talked about the asking the county to advocate to the FAA, which they have, on trying to diversify the approach path. I think one other quick point I'd point out there, which I think was mentioned in the past, is I actually went just and looked in my electronic logbook to see what is the designated noise abatement procedure flight path for the airport. And I think I mentioned it before, but, and I know you probably can't see this, but this, which is officially issued December 5th to January 20th, does, on the north side, it directs people to fly over some of the noise-sensitive areas like Chappaqua, Newcastle, etc. So we have a bit of a quandary here from a, from a sort of procedures perspective, that clearly there are a lot of noise complaints coming from this part of the county. However, aircraft that are following the noise abatement procedure are being told to fly over the area that is getting a lot of noise complaints. So I think as the dialogue with the FAA continues, this is the sort of thing that there's opportunity to improve. I think it's just important to point that out in the sense that people aren't not following the rules by say flying over Chappaqua. They are in fact following the rules by flying over Chappaqua, and to the extent that we want to impact that, we have to change the rules, and that's what the conversations with the FAA hopefully address.
Would possibly be helpful to explain how this conundrum arose. I mean, if it's, in other words, if it's Chappaqua that seems to have the
It's
strongest
Newcastle.
grievances.
It's Newcastle.
Newcastle has the strongest grievances, the town of Newcastle. How is it that the procedure for following noise abatement procedures requires flying over the area that's complaining the most? Sounds like a bit of a chicken and an egg.
I mean, I might defer to Peter or maybe some of the history. My only brief understanding of it is that at the time that this procedure was created, the noise-sensitive areas were more like Greenwich and some other areas, which led to the creation of the current procedure. But Peter, maybe you can chime in on that.
Well, again, the noise abatement procedure are following the same approaches that have been published by the FAA.
Yeah.
So those are the things that are going to be asked of the FAA at this meeting, is what's different, how's it working, but all our noise abatement procedures basically mimic, departures, the SIDS,
Yeah.
the stars. Those are all, I don't mean the stars in the skies, anything like that. So those are all the things that they mimic. So regardless if you had no noise abatement procedure, you still have a procedure to come into the airport.
Yeah.
So those are the questions that you want to ask at that meeting.
Yeah.
Well,
I'm
ready now.
You're ready?
So, as an example, I disagree with your characterization, because in the analysis that we did, okay, even with the saying nothing's changed, we saw a very substantial, over the period of the study that HMH is doing, we saw a substantial increase in the amount of planes that are entering the flight path, much higher, much farther out from the airport. There's nothing in the flight procedures that would dictate, that would explain why that is happening. Do you agree?
Well, that's the specific of the procedure says that they're encouraging you to join that final as far out as possible. That's what it says on here.
I think the procedures say at or beyond the outer marker.
Yeah, beyond the outer marker would be
Yeah, but
further out.
if that language exists somewhere, be as far out as possible, I'd see that. If you forward that to me, I'd appreciate that. Is that the language that exists? Join as far out as possible, Peter?
I don't think it says, just to clarify, I don't think it says as far out as possible. I think it's saying beyond the outer marker, which is encouraging people to
It
move
says
further.
at or beyond the outer marker.
Yes, and the point in question is beyond the outer marker.
Okay, and do you agree that we saw in the analysis that we did covering the period that HMH is studying a market increase of the amount of planes that are joining the flight path, instead of 5 miles away, 7 and 10 miles away.
So-
David wanted to know
Yeah.
why people are upset, and from the data that we had during this period of time, it's about double.
Well, so just to be clear, the period that we looked at was slightly broader than the period that HMMH looked at, and the period that
I'm talking about the
HMMH,
HMMH.
but the period that overlapped with HMMH did agree that there was an increase in that period. However, when we looked back even further, it was a decrease relative to what we had seen in the decade prior. So it's a mixed message. It's not accurate to say that it just increased. It did increase, but it's still lower than it had been. That's what we said.
Disagree about that too. I'm not done yet, I'm sorry. So we're, at this point, just so I understand, has the phase 1 has not been completed?
Correct.
Right.
We're still waiting for the additional contours and some additional information.
What has been forwarded to the FAA?
The presentation that you were given was sent to the FAA.
Given the outstanding questions that remain, I know that I had them, I think you had them, about trying to reconcile data on that report, trying to understand why the runway, usage changed dramatically. Does that concern anyone besides me about forwarding that to the FAA with no answers?
But my thought would be that I think the county forwarded it as a preliminary work in progress. And as we heard Susan ask, actually the county is asking us what other things might they do in phase 2. And I think, so this could be an opportunity to say perhaps we include the wind or weather analysis if that's a possibility in that data. I don't know if that's a possibility.
I don't think it takes a phase 2 analysis to try and reconcile the two numbers. That's just a matter of whether somebody wants to put in the effort or not.
We're not going to further reconcile the two numbers. We've talked with HMMH. They've given us an explanation as to why the numbers are different. The number used in the HMMH report is significantly higher than the NOMS data, and I forwarded you their response as to why that is.
Which was a non-response.
Well,
It didn't answer my question. It justified, they said that using FAA data is acceptable for these types of reports. But that wasn't my question. My question was, and I think it's a reasonable question, based upon all the work that we've done and all the historical monitor reports that the airport's been putting out, I've seen at least 10 years worth. I think it's not unreasonable for the public to want to understand what the difference is between what we see each month on this report, which I think the airport spends a lot of time on and putting together, and what the FAA is using.
Well, consistently the FAA numbers are higher than the NOMS numbers. There's a number of reasons for that. For example, what Chris explained just a few moments ago, which is how they count the touch and goes. That's one reason for it.
Okay,
could be flyovers counted by the tower that are not in the HPN NOMS number. So there's a number of reasons why the NOMS numbers are lower consistently than the FAA numbers. But the FAA, if you are asking the FAA to take action, the FAA is going to want their data as the study, which is why we had HMMH use the FAA data, because the whole purpose is to take that to the FAA and see if we can talk to them about some resolution.
Even if you want to use the FAA data, that doesn't preclude you from educating stakeholders all around the county between the two differences. And with the budget of $200,000, I don't see how we didn't have HMMH have the ability to explain the difference.
I believe we have explained the difference, and I don't think it's a good use of HMMH's time to further drill down into that, because there's no impact to the result of the study, and we gave you some basic reasons why the numbers would be different. We're not going to look at each track and figure out why it is or isn't in NOMS. That's not a good use of anybody's time.
So if all those differences were touch and goes, which would lead you to a much different understanding of traffic at the airport than if they were all actual airline flights, but that would that color your perspective of what's happening at the airport?
I mean, my opinion is I think they answered the question.
I'm asking you a different question.
But they're not all
You-
touch,
you-
they're not all touch and goes. That's one of the
I'm-
several
I'm-
reasons
look, I'm asking
why
you-
the numbers would be different.
You are on a data committee, okay? We're the people who've looked at this stuff, okay? If an increase of 20,000 flights, operations, of touch and goes was added, and all of a sudden now they say, well, those 20,000 are gone, and that's why things, that would color my perspective of that statement.
So, David has a question which I want to get to in a second. To very briefly answer your question, because you asked me, my personal opinion is yes, there are some slight differences. Yes, it's been explained that there's a number of reasons why that exists. In my observation and from a data analytics perspective, those differences do not seem to be of a level that fundamentally changes the findings of the various analyses that have been done. I think we could drive ourselves crazy to try and understand why there are very slight differences, but I'm not seeing anything that is indicating that there's a material difference.
Do you think a 20,000 difference is a slight difference?
I'm not aware what you're talking about on the 20,000
The
difference.
2013 number
Okay.
is,
So,
the headline takeaway, as reported in the press, as reported in the report, is that traffic is down dramatically, drastically from 2013 to 2018.
but my recommendation is that the numbers that are cited there, which were in the report, which are the exact same numbers you find if you go to the FAA website, that's the numbers they're citing. If you have concerns or questions about the FAA numbers, I would strongly encourage you to address that at the open house that's coming up later this month. But I can't answer why the FAA's numbers.
Well, I'm gonna put it differently. I asked this question was raised, including by other people who aren't here tonight, back on October 23rd. We're sitting here on January 8th. And it feels like the county's running out the clock. And I don't think this is beyond HMH's ability to reconcile this information to numbers, to data that we're used to looking at
So-
every month.
So I think the county's answered the question regarding the scope. So
So-
I do want to let David ask his question.
So the answer, as I understand it, is we're not gonna do it. Because we don't think it's a good use of HMH's time.
I think they've answered the question.
It's not relevant to the results of the
Yeah,
findings
if
of the
it was,
study.
if there was something that was inconsistent proportionately, then we would be concerned, but we're not. But it isn't.
I'm gonna have more questions.
Just to slightly clarify, wouldn't it be, instead of, trying to calculate the impact, for example, of that the FAA is not going to count or is going to count, flights that don't stop at HPN or take off land, whatever, wouldn't it be helpful just if you took the FAA numbers and compared those numbers year to year or 5 years to 8 years or 10 years? And isn't it really a matter that you could use the ANOMS year to year or use the FAA year to year? Either way, I mean, as long as you have a standard measurement, it doesn't really matter which one you measure.
And that
it sounds
would
like.
be, I think that would be maybe a question for somebody else about that.
No, I'm happy if you respond.
That might be a way to go. If I want more details, like we get the detail on the monthly report on the FAA data. I'd like to know how many were touch and goes. I'd like to know how many were transients, so you can actually get a feel for what's happening. When I just get a single number, I've got no idea what's happening.
All right, so you're saying then that you're not happy if it's FAA, 5 years ago to today versus ANOM 5 years ago to today? You're saying is that you don't have enough data within either measurement?
I think, to the extent, I spend a lot of time asking about the breakdown. And I know probably hundreds of hours at this point of asking about, coming here and sitting with Chris, and all that's for naught.
And how does that, if I might ask, and perhaps Nick can clarify, how does that relate back to, Nick's very helpful, your colored, I don't know what you call it in data analytics, but your noise contours? How does all this relate to the fact that it seems that we've discussed this in the past, that in fact less and less turf, so to speak, is being impacted at the higher noise levels, which is, I think, attributable to the side that the planes make less noise. How does that interact with?
We didn't, those noise contours looked at a very small period of land around the airport. they didn't look at any place anywhere near the Adam, anywhere outside the Adam marker where all these complaints are coming from.
Because it went below the decibel limit.
According to the consultant, they didn't do that because the noise levels were too low to measure.
Well, when we get the rest of the report, one of which is a 45, maybe we'll find out, but it'd be, so I don't know what that looks like. At this point, I don't have enough information, but the idea was to have the completed phase 1 report before the FAA meeting. And at this point, I have no confidence in the number. I can't, people ask, well, what happened, and I can usually tell them, I can't now.
Just to clarify, when you say you have no confidence in the number, what number are you talking about?
I don't know what the input is comprised of. There's 173,000 operations. The airport gives us a nice breakdown. I just have, the breakdown that I have here isn't the kind of number that I can tell anybody, I know what's in there.
Okay.
And I think that,
So
the noise report goes into I believe it goes into the master report, the master plan. So this all has a kind of a follow-on effect. So if we start putting a noise report that is either inaccurate, we don't understand, it takes away your comfort.
So I just want to. Yeah.
You might feel that way, but I don't.
I think you've made this point about the numbers being, you're saying the numbers are inaccurate, etc. I think the numbers are the numbers that are published by the federal authority on aviation in this country. If you believe that those numbers are not correct, then by all means go to the FAA and
I don't have to
indicate that. But I don't think we can just
But
say that the numbers are not right. You've asked the question.
Wait.
Hold on, I'm talking now. You've asked the question to the county many times about the differences. I think they've answered the question.
So you're not concerned about the fact that the county won't do the work, or won't ask HMH to do the work?
I
In a
think the
$200,000 contract?
It was still speaking.
Okay, you've asked the question, the answer they gave, which I'm misquoting this, please correct me, was that yes, there's a small difference, there's a reason, or a range of reasons why that is, however, that difference does not appear to have any material impact on the findings of the study. That, to me, seems like a very reasonable response.
But we also don't know whether it's the ANOMS data or the NOMS data plus this number, or overlapping change. We don't know. I don't know.
Well, I think this was addressed at the last meeting in terms of the discrepancies. The consultants used a combination of numbers that is the most conservative. In other words, I personally would understand the concern if they were undercounting traffic numbers and sort of saying that there wasn't noise because they undercounted numbers. The exact opposite has happened. They have, if anything, overcounted the amount of traffic based on the discrepancy that exists. They took the highest traffic numbers, not the lowest traffic numbers. So there's not really a possibility there that they've somehow, there's traffic that's not being counted. If anything, they're counting traffic that doesn't exist. And in fact, they even said that in the presentation. They said because they don't have radar tracks for certain things, they sort of average these additional numbers in. That only impact of that is going to be to increase the noise levels, increase the size of the DNL contours.
I don't, because if you take out, as an example, if you take out 50,000 NOMS flights, okay, that are coming straight down the pike, okay, either up 34 or down 16, and instead you put in.
There's no flights
nothing's
have
being
been
taken out.
just-
Nothing's being taken out. It's being plussed up.
Yeah,
Well,
they're only adding. Nobody has taken it.
So
There's
one
never been a
question-
data.
one
Let me
question-
finish. There's never, my understanding of the study.
He can handle himself.
My understanding of the study is that if they had data, the detailed data, the radar data showing the exact location, altitude, type of plane, etc., they used it in the study and they counted it. The only scenario where they in any way changed the numbers, etc., was to add additional flights to that to bring the numbers up to the level that the FAA reported. And so there is no reasonable possibility that I've seen or that anyone's managed to show that indicates that there are planes out there that were somehow deleted or not counted or undercounted, etc. If anything, it's the exact opposite.
I'll give you an example, and maybe this will be comforted by you getting an answer from the county. This is important, okay? It impacts the entire master plan, and it impacts all the work that I've been doing here for the past year and a half. So I asked a question of the county, whether or not the number that's being reported is the noms, all the noms patterns, plus to get to the number, which would be more comforting, or if it was something else. I didn't get an answer.
My understanding of the answer was it is as you
Yes.
described, unless I misheard.
Was there a reason why you couldn't say yes then when I
I
asked the
thought I said that 15
I
times, but
heard an answer.
if not, I'll say it again. The
Yeah.
answer is yes.
So,
So there's no noms data in there no noms data that was deleted from the,
Correct.
And we can clarify that. You
Well,
know, I mean, if you know.
Remember, I've been trying to clear that since October. Okay, so,
Consider it clarified.
okay. And then for the runway data, you know, we've looked at I looked at the winds, and we can look at it together if you want. I don't see any difference. Have we come up with any other explanation for why that would have changed so drastically? Hmm?
It's the weather. I mean, this airport's the tail, we're not the dog. We are dependent on the weather first out of all airports, and then we are the fourth out of the airports, the third, if you count just Newark and LaGuardia. They decide which way they're gonna land, and we then follow on to that. There's nobody in the tower that has a day where they get to decide arbitrarily which way a plane lands.
I don't know that. I don't, when there's 20% of the time at least, there are calm winds.
There are calm winds,
So,
but
and-
then LaGuardia and Newark decide which patterns they're gonna use, and we follow on. We don't get an independent choice.
And you don't think that process has changed at all in the past 5 years?
No, I think the weather has gotten worse in the last 3 years,
Define worse.
meaning we got the land to the south. I believe your entire community is being affected by a weather pattern over the last 3 years that has increased the number of landings to the south. And it's also happened at times when people are around more. I mean, you're complaining about it raining too much on my house. Well, what I'm saying is that you can't control the weather.
Yeah, is that the county's position? It's the
I'm
weather?
not from the county.
I'm asking the county.
Peter, I mean, I know we're putting you on the spot, but I mean, generally speaking, my understanding
He's
is.
right,
it's-
the weather does have a factor in what happens. Now, the weather pattern can change in the next 2 years and there'll be less traffic. The thing is that no matter what the weather is and what percentage it's gonna be, and you could take all the weather data in the world.
What you
because
mean
they
wind
have it
direction,
available,
really, yeah.
And you're still gonna have planes over there, just that, what's the frequency? The frequency can be determined by the weather. And what he was alluding to also is that when LaGuardia changes their flight patterns on calm days, we have to stick on 16 because of the flight patterns. They're all interrelated, so there's a lot of different factors that go into it.
So it might be calm winds here, but if the wind is blowing, and keep in mind, we often have calm winds here, but down where all the other airports are, which is near the water, they quite rarely have calm winds. So what they're doing is what we have
Always
to
an
do.
onshore and offshore breeze in the summer,
Okay.
one way or the other.
Well, then that explanation would be that LaGuardia is more often telling us we've got to use that. And maybe that's the
Well,
answer.
yeah,
But
and not just, but keep in mind, then you, right next to LaGuardia, you have JFK, and they have to, so the whole system has to operate as one cohesive.
I understand the New York Metroplex and how it works, okay? I just don't see how these two things, I'm still talking, she's interrupting me. I don't see how these two, when you look at it, 99% of the time, I don't see, where 34, the highest flights on LaGuardia and the lowest flights on 34 hit each other.
So the county has arranged open house with the very people who make these decisions later this month, and I would strongly encourage you to ask them, because as much as we have people here who can maybe talk about it, like, you don't work for the FAA, right? And so they are the people who make those decisions, and I think that's the perfect place to have that. I'm not trying to cut the conversation off, but that is why we're having the open house, right? So that's why the county's having the open house. So maybe we ask them and follow up on it.
Will
next
there be
week.
somebody from the FAA who can answer that question?
I would assume there would be, given that they're bringing ATC representatives, and those are the people that address them.
Rob, ask the FAA the question, how often does the HPN tower get to decide which runway they use independently of the rest of the system? And I believe they'll tell you we're the third choice. We get directed by 2 other airports as to which way we have to land. Ask them, how often does the White Plains get to decide on their own?
Okay, if that was the case, then I would think we would know that. That our tower, because we had the air tower controller here about a year ago maybe?
Yep.
He didn't bring that up. He didn't say he was being told more often to do that. And he was asked kind of the same question.
And just give your name for the record.
I'm sorry, John Williams. Yeah, that's good. I found John's point about weather for 2-3 years to be kind of interesting. Is that related at all to the jet stream? Is there sort of a contention that the jet stream?
I think it's global warming. I mean, honestly, there's worse weather everywhere in the country.
Well, no, but the wind change, I mean, global warming.
When there's bad weather, you land to the south. Bad weather is a low pressure system coming in and replacing a high. The nature of the wind then makes you land to the south.
Right, so it's not a matter that the jet stream has been sort of changing for the last
No,
few years.
I mean, the jet stream always goes west-east and so forth, but when a low-pressure system removes a high-pressure system, the wind then creates you need to land to the south.
In the northern hemisphere.
Yes, I only know northeast.
Do you have a question? No. Yeah.
Okay, Jim Smith from Newcastle. Did you mention that they are gonna, HMMH is going to go out to the 45 contour level now?
I believe that's.
And is that gonna stop? I know the other thing they mentioned, their scope is that they or in their draft presentation was that they're stopping at the 5 mile or the 30,000 foot distance. So the contours aren't closed, that they've drawn, at least that are in that draft. So essentially it while they were measuring out to the 45th maybe now, I know they weren't in the draft, that it wouldn't necessarily close the loop to go out to include some of the outer
Contours are the contours, wherever they go, they go.
I understand that, but that
5 mile controls it, I guess.
Yeah, but they said
That was a land use.
Oh, land use, yes, land use,
I think
yes.
there's-
Not for contours, but for land use.
I guess they talked in the scope about the study area was limited to that 30,000 foot distance.
For land use, not for noise contours.
So okay. And another one, if I might, while I'm going, is they also talked about I know there's some inputs to their model that are talked about in the draft presentation, but they talked about preparing a memorandum on assumptions for the county's approval. Is that available? And if there's some extra detail that may be behind that, and maybe it'll come out when there's a draft report, an actual report.
Is it foilable?
I guess.
Well, the draft
I don't see
report's
why
not
we-
foilable, but I guess.
Well, if it's a
Everything's
draft.
foilable, but it's not
It's
answerable.
opinions haven't been, you don't have all the conclusions in a draft.
One last question on you mentioned that they had, when they started to go out further beyond the outer market, they had, they said, well, there wasn't enough noise, the levels were too low. In some prior work that they did for the county back in 27 around the environmental impact statement for the change in airspace or the next gen issue.
Space redesign.
Yeah, they talked about in that report the importance of measuring those changes in low-level changes, because a change at a 45 to 50 DNL level is actually a pretty big deal for those communities, and they particularly highlighted those. They highlighted as they called it, I think, the Chappaqua Loop. And the impact that small change may have. So I hope that the HMH study is sort of following on from that, is including that change impact at the lower level, because I think that's a lot of what the communities beyond the outer marker are experiencing. It may not be an on average, because we know the shortfalls of DNL, on average a 70 DNL level or 65. But 45 from 45 to 50 on average is a pretty big deal still. So,
I think it's more the issue of the fact that the nighttime resting sound out there is about in upper 30s.
Yeah.
But when a plane comes over, you go into the upper 50s. You go from the upper 30s to the upper 50s, that's a huge impact and change for somebody trying to sleep, for somebody trying to be outside. It's 200 times more pressure, if I have the right calculation, but it's a lot. When the Phase 1 report is finally done, which I think is supposed to be sometime in January, will that Phase 1 report be shared with the AB?
Yes, yeah.
And will HMH come back to answer questions about that analysis?
We'll have to check with them, but certainly they'll be back after the Phase 2 and possibly after Phase 1.
Well, after Phase 2 could be a year from now, right?
I wouldn't expect it to be anywhere near that long. I mean, I can ask them to come back, I just
So
can't guarantee their.
Did they decline to come back?
No, no, we did not ask. We're paying them, they'll do well.
I understand we're paying them. I know exactly how much we're paying.
Say Peter's done.
Any other questions about?
And what is the deadline? What is the target date for the Phase 2 study guidelines to be put together?
Well, I think we want to develop the scope of work as soon as possible, and then depending on the scope of work, we'll determine how long it will take.
But is there a date when we're looking to have that Phase 2 completed, or still kind of TBD?
Depends on the scope of work.
Will the data set that's been used that we have now, will that be made available to the public for public use and public manipulation?
I don't know, I'll check.
I asked that question a while ago.
My apologies, I
Okay.
did not have that on my list, I will check. By the way, they will be here on January 22nd at the FAA meeting, so
I'm
you
sure
can.
we'd be very competitive to get in front of them, but. And, I would like the HMH representative to come back here as soon as possible, but I'm not sure how my fellow board members feel. To answer questions that.
You don't like their answers?
Oh, what?
You don't like their answers?
I've only talked to him once.
So I think,
And-
yeah,
and-
I think.
Who is this? This is
I'm
John.
John
Yeah,
Rabbit,
so-
Business Council of Westchester.
Yeah, thank
You like their answers, right?
So, okay, I think we have the FAA meeting coming up, HMH will be at that meeting. I think a lot of the questions you're asking are really questions that HMH themselves will be able to answer. If you're, in terms of, them coming back to this meeting again, of course, they are welcome to come whenever they are available. And I think we just heard that they will at a minimum be coming back after the next substantial piece of work with Phase 2. And we would certainly keep in communication with the county about making those arrangements. But in terms of talking to them immediately, they will be here later this month and you can talk
My
to them.
question is different. Do other members of the board want to see them here soon?
Well, you're gonna see them at the end of the month, so why don't we?
That's not for the AB.
Well,
That's for the public. But am I the only member of the AB who was any interest in speaking to?
would you like to propose a motion that this board asks them to come?
I don't think I can propose a resolution, right? What can I?
But it has me, I mean, it's not a formal
But
resolution,
if I'm the
any
only-
action.
If I'm the only
so-
person, who wants it, so that's all.
I mean, can we let's just summarize for the community and for our viewing audience. Just perhaps lay out the stages, where we've gotten to at this point, what we expect to still be studied and reported, and what, sort of thing do we want him to come here to talk about? Because for the viewing audience, this may be a little bit disjointed. So perhaps the chair can just go through that in a nutshell.
Yeah. So if I get this wrong, please tell me, but my understanding is, in order to understand the noise environment and the evolution thereof around the airport, the county engaged HMH, which is arguably the leading consulting firm in the country for studying environmental impacts around airports, particularly around noise. They gathered data from the radar data and the FAA data to build these models to establish what the current noise contours and traffic pattern profiles look like around the airport. The very same company firm did a similar study 15 years ago, I believe, which looked at periods going back into the late 1980s. So there's some continuity there in terms of the various studies that have been done. This phase 1 of that study, which covered 2013, 16, and 18, or 2013, 15, 18, 3 years, was presented to this board in October, I believe, at which point we asked them some questions. The presentation of that, including the associated figures, is, I believe, on the airport website for this board. And at that discussion, there's very productive discussion about what that was showing and some questions and asks back to them for additional things that could be done, including the 45 dB noise contour and some other questions that were asked. They're due to now do a, as it's being referred to, phase 2 study, which would include kind of follow-up on some of those additional items, and I'm guessing kind of an official summary report of sorts. What they showed first was, was a PowerPoint deck, but they'll kind of put an actual report together and present that back to the county, and it would be the sort of latest edition of their continuing study of what's going on at the airport. Is that a fair representation of?
Yeah, absolutely. The only clarification I would make is that the phase 1 will conclude with the additional data we just talked about, the DNL contours at lower levels, and also a review of the current noise monitoring system.
Right, yes.
That will be the conclusion of phase 1.
Yeah.
Then phase 2 is only if we want them to take that data and those findings and do some additional work, whether it's recommendations or additional research or whatever. We can do that in phase 2.
Sure. So then it would seem that Mr. Fleischer's, has some merit to it. There's some merit to suggestions. I mean, basically the HMMH was going to do more work, finalize their work, do more analysis, respond to our questions, and present a more definitive report. So perhaps there would be some merit to the idea that given that they're going to present a more definitive report, to have them come here, present it to some extent, and respond to questions from the board and the public. So to that extent, I think that's an idea with merit now. When they're supposed to submit that report is kind of up in the air.
And the urgency is that we have a master plan report which has already begun, correct?
Yes.
And that relies upon the noise report as an input. And so to the extent that there are any questions or clarifications or things that need to be changed in that's not available now as part of the master plan process. These things all flow into each other. So I get concerned the fact that we don't have a final noise report early on, which was the idea, in the master plan process. And we don't.
Well, I think, okay, and if I'm not stating this correctly, please tell me, but the initial findings are not gonna change, right? So it's not like there's a first report and then there's gonna be report 2, which is completely different. The additional work is in addition to the findings they already have. So I don't think it's accurate to say that there's nothing that can go into the report. Everything that's coming out could go into the master plan. And there are sort of these fine-tuning questions and additional noise contours that will add additional color to what they've already presented, but I don't believe the fundamental message, at least insofar as the areas they currently looked at, it's going to change.
They have looked at areas.
The areas they currently looked at,
Just, the noise report, the master plans, the airport impacts a much wider area.
Yes, but the questions about 45 dB is being addressed, and when it's available, I'm sure it will be shared with everybody. And again, what their timeline is, I don't know, but we can ask them later this month.
The timeline in the contract, I think, was to be done in October or November.
That I don't know, but I feel like we're kind of going on circles on this issue of the noise thing, unless there's a substantial new question or point.
I think the county's position is very clear. That hopefully, I don't know if we'll get it back to ask questions, but I think it's factual that we've been asking for him to come back different members of the board, including myself, to come back since October. And the county decided that wasn't something
Well,
that was worth his time.
I think
This
there's a
is the
broad
second meeting since
Yeah, this is
October.
only the first of all, this is only the second meeting since that.
Right.
We have them coming back in a few weeks, where you know, and
Not
as.
for us, though.
Well, but, okay, it's technically for everyone, not just for us, but you're more than welcome to go. And I think there's broad consensus on this board that they should come back here and that should be arranged. The exact dates, we're not gonna solve that problem right now, but I don't hear anybody saying, no, they shouldn't come back or et cetera. So I feel like we've kind of addressed that point, that they will come back, they're available later this month for the entire public to go talk to, including this board. And that there will be additional work forthcoming, and when those results come out, let's bring them back. And you know, speaking personally, I'd say, well, let's wait till they tell us something we didn't already see, and then let's ask them questions about that. Otherwise, it's maybe not the most productive use of time. That's my personal.
Speaking of time, we've been talking about this for almost an hour.
Yeah.
And I see we have on the agenda the item of the 2020 airport budget
Yeah.
presentation. Are we intending to
Yeah.
reach that tonight?
So I
Does
think-
anyone else consider that important?
Yeah, I think we've addressed the noise issue, and I'm inclined to move forward and discuss the budget at this point.
Thank you.
And so, with that, I know we have county budget discussion.
Okay.
Is that you said?
I moved around regarding the budget. And just to make it, sometimes the questions are hard to answer in writing, because it's almost like you feel like you have to write a book. What Hal and I would like to do is invite the board to come and ask the questions, whatever you'd like to do it, to get more clarity on some of the questions, and to also fine tune some of the questions so that we give you the proper answer. But in the meantime, I'm just gonna kind of give you an overview. The airport operating budget, just so everybody understands it, it's $12. And as you know, Christmas comes fast, 12 months goes real quick, and we only look at a snapshot of 12 months. We start the budget process in June of the previous year. And we go through the entire budget. So we take a snapshot of what we think is gonna happen at the airport during that time, and we anticipate what we can expect. When you get into the budget process itself, there are things that change, equipment breaks, something happens, a taxiway goes through, that you have to manipulate the budget by offsetting something in order to pay for something else. And that's what we do all the time. I drive Hal crazy when I do that, because he always warns me of the horrible things that are gonna happen to me and what the auditor's gonna say to me. But again, this is basically what we look at. The bottom line here is, as the airport manager, I control the airport operating budget. That's the only thing I control. But it also controls me. It keeps me in line on what I have to spend and what my expenditures are allowed. I also have other bosses that are involved, like the budget commissioner. Everything I do and everything we do, Hal and I have to talk to the budget commissioner to get approval on. So a lot of things we have a free hand at, that is normally that we budget for, but other things, when there are changes in the budget, we have to make those changes and request those changes. This is what we do on an operating budget. This is what we try to do. One thing is, we sign grant agreements to operate the airport. That's how we get federal grants. And one of the things that's the most important thing is our rates and charges. And this here, reasonable and without unjust discrimination in our fees. We can't just raise fees because I feel like it. You know, they are accountable. We're accountable to the federal government to make sure that our fees are just. And that is because an airport acts as a monopoly. I mean, we're really in a monopoly. You can't go anyplace else unless you're flying an airplane. Maybe Nick can, but you know, most people can. So in other words, if we try to price somebody out or we do something, that's discrimination. If we don't have set values and reasonableness for our budget and our numbers, that could be challenged by the federal government. A complaint can be filed, the federal government will come in and challenge us on it, and we would have to either face civil penalties or we'd have to make adjustments. So, break-even budget. It goes back to the grant assurances. Every airport tries to run a break-even budget. That means we take in the revenue and our expenses should match up. So that's what we try to do. So a perfect budget is a break-even budget. Do we end up making a little bit of a profit? Sure, we do. We pocket that immediately into our special revenue fund. I don't pocket it. Good. I go to jail for that. But again, that's what every airport does. It's break even. That's part of your rates and charges, that's part of your grant assurances. That you're not arbitrarily making a ton of money here for no reason. Again, here's some of our revenues. We're gonna hit the special revenue fund. Our special revenue fund was started in 1998, and that's our savings account. That's our savings account. So just to kind of give you an idea of how we work a budget is, my operating budget is basically my checking account. That's what I use. I have a checking account. And that's what I do to pay the payroll, pay for expenses. And in the first quarter of every year, our expenditures exceed our revenues. It's just natural progression. We're buying all our equipment, we're buying all our supplies, we're buying everything. But the revenue coming into the airport doesn't match our expenditures. So what we do is we go into the special revenue fund. That's our savings account, just like a household expense. That's our savings account. So what we do is we draw out of that savings account to offset our, pay our expenses. And we do that with the budget department. We'll tell them that we need to draw off of that account. When we hit the fourth quarter, we generally, our revenues are much higher than our expenditures. So we're catching back up again. And during the course of the year, you can see the numbers start to go down and we start getting back to zero. And again, these are some of the things that we collect revenues on. Here's our fund balance. This is our special revenue account. This is it. This is what we got. Okay? This is our savings account. This is what we have. Now, the slide before it said airports cannot have any type of fund balance. They can have a little bit, but you can't have an excessive amount. So if we were to take this up to $40 million, there could be a complaint against us because they're saying you are generating so much cash that something's wrong with your rates and charges. So we look at that. But we balance this out and you can see it goes up and down, up and down. And some of the decisions on what you have is if you have a capital program that is run by the county, which is a long-term process. The airport does not run the capital budget, which is a different budget. We will tell them what we'd like to have in a capital budget. We will give them advice on what the budget is, and we may even write up some of the scripts on the budget. But again, we may use this account where we get federal funds in that account, may not get federal funds, or if there's anything that we would have to bond, we may make a decision through the budget department or the finance department to cash it up. You'll see the thing in there called cash up. That's where we take cash out of there to actually make the whole thing whole, because we'll get federal funds and we'll get state funds, and whatever left over, we have to cash up. So we try to generate the cash. So these accounts go up and down, but again, you don't want to get it too high, but it also is a reserve. What do we do in a budget presentation? Not rocket science. We do a budget presentation. That's when Hal starts getting his pencils out. He starts asking for accounts. What do we think we're going to have for the year? He asks me, the properties manager, everybody, what do you think we're going to need to spend? What kind of revenues are coming in? Because we have agreements that have kick-up clauses in it for rents, where every 5 years there might be a CPI adjustment. What does that equate to? How much more money is that going to generate in revenue? And then we do the budget submission to the county. That generally goes to the commissioner of DPW. He will say, yeah, I like it, nay, I don't like it. Then it goes to the budget office for them to cut it and actually start slashing and slashing. And we have to go in and beg for why we have to have it. And again, big thing that you have to know, it's only a 12-month window. That's what it is. I can't anticipate, if we're gonna discover something that's gonna cost us $1 billion, I just go for a 12-month. And then we go to audit it. The finance commissioner will generate, O'Connor Davies, sign a contract with O'Connor Davies. They come in March, they do a full budget audit, takes about 2 weeks or so, and then they give a report to the county to see how well we did. And it's like a report card, And then I wait for mom and dad to determine whether I'm gonna get an allowance or not. So, these are things how it works. This area here is basically out of the budget book. And again, it's online, it's a public document. You can look at it any time. But again, to go into the nuts and bolts of everything would just take up too much time. That's why we offer the board members the opportunity to come in and talk to us. I know there's questions that were asked that the board all wants some of the questions. If we have 1,900 employees here that depend on this airport for their livelihood, we take that into consideration. Security management is important. We just had an issue where do we have to spend some money because of what was happening in Iran? What are things that occur? And we budget for those things. We actually budget for the fact that we could have, you know, a different level of security here at the airport, and that might mean police officers, might be equipment, or it might be overtime, which is generally what it is. So again, the budget reflects all those things. And if some way we have to get more money, we can pull it out of the special revenue fund. Department initiatives, these are initiatives that we try to get done, again, 12 months. So certain things are put in the budget. I know one of the questions that they had was, what's the aircraft lavatory waste disposal? All it is two little garages. It's not a huge, massive building. It's not something large. It's actually a hole to dump the waste from the airplane in. Right now, we just basically pick up a manhole and dump it in outside. And this is actually to build a proper one with what they call a titulator, which is a grinder. So again, those are the type of things. But they're small little objects. Snow equipment building, it's actually in capital. But we're going to fund it out of our operating budget for that process and then pay for it on capital when it gets around to it. These are some of the things that we do. Again, department initiatives, we have a lot of initiatives. 12 months is not a long time to get a lot of these things done. But we have a plan, and these initiatives can go on for year after year and try to do it, and sometimes they are put in capital, sometimes they stay in the operating budget, but these are some of the things that we do. New things we're going to do, we're going to do a terminal ramp. The Commissioner talked about that. We expanded, like this one here, the county allowed us to jump ahead. We actually did that already. We actually did it. So we did it in last year's budget. We used money in our last year's budget to do it. We needed to jump ahead on that one because it was important for capacity expansion for the collection of de-icing fluids. So the county allowed us to move that one forward. And then we have our ongoing projects. Service indicators is just an indicator of what we think is going to happen and what happened in 2018, what our numbers in 2019 and 2020, and the number of airlines and what we anticipate. Again, it's just an estimate. Again, operating budget, this is all in the book. It's all in the private thing. And again, there's behind the weeds, there's a lot more things behind it, which we can answer more accurately to you. I'm just going to go quickly through it, but it gives you an idea of what's in the budget. Technical specs, non-recurring repairs, passive facility charges to capital, we transfer that to capital, that's done through that. I guess everyone's falling asleep already? Falling asleep yet? Because I'm going to fall asleep. Again, these are all operating budget. Now here's one, this is our 4380. This kind of breaks down what our technical services are. It includes a lot of things in it, in a more detailed thing, painting of the interior floor, certain things that we're going to have. Sometimes we don't use this, sometimes we have to draw from another account if something is more expensive, but it's generally our operating contractual services. So you can see our contractual services all listed out. So it's pretty extensive, but again, emergency pavement repairs, we put $100,000 in. I'll probably spend that through because I've already evaluated a small taxiway, Taxiway Charlie, and Taxiway Fox that needs some pavement repairs, so we'll probably go through that. If for some reason the emergency repairs become over $100,000, we go to a budget and say we want to transfer it from one account to another, add more money. This is an example of our non-recurring projects. These are our projects that we asked for. This is the first place that the budget department cuts me. First place they wipe out everything on. No. But this is where they go in and cut. They asked for $3 million. They basically cut it to about $2 million. And you know, we like them. We like them anyway. But we ask for certain things, and all we do is we say what's more important. What do we have to do that's more important, and what can we do to defer to a following year?
And a lot of those are short-form contracts because they're
a lot of them are
public works.
short-form contracts. A lot of them are contractual. A lot of them, I'll go to the commissioner and say, hey, I got a bad taxiway, I need to fix it, here's the money, I got the money for it. Here's our equipment budget, this is what we asked for in equipment. We asked for $935,000, they cut us down to just a little under $5 million, so So it's a matter of, what's important and what can we get away with and what can we make repairs or how
Sorry,
many.
Peter.
500,000 even.
Huh?
500,000, you said 5
I said,
million.
what did I say?
You said 5 million. Wishful thinking.
5 million, well, I was optimistic.
Zero.
Yeah.
Fast question, Pete.
Sure.
For contract, you indicated that the budget is online. The contractual services budget is not online as part of the county budget, or is it?
No, it's part of our budget, the airport budget.
Okay.
So in other words, it falls in the operating budget, so it's a 12-month window. That's what it is, but it's not the capital or any place else in the county. It's ours. Now, some of the contracts will dovetail on an existing county contract. So in other words, you may see something like security services, which we go through DPW, but the airport will have a section of that one, but I still have to fund it out of here. So even though I'm on a county contract exclusive to the county, if I say to the commissioner, I need to put in 20 security cameras, and it's going to cost $100,000, he's got a contract, he says you're going to go off this county contract, and I have to take the $100,000 and pay him the $100,000.
Now, how much of this, however, is subject to the Board of Legislature and/or the county executive's decision as to what to bond for? Just because something is even passed in the capital budget doesn't mean, it may take 5 years to happen or never.
That's all the county. It's all the board decision, the county executive's decision. That's what I'm saying, the only thing that I have any type of control over is the airport operating budget.
Okay, and is this in the airport operating budget, the equipment, or is it?
No, this is actually this is what we request with the budget department, but they don't really print this. And again, they don't print
But
it
it
because.
is in your, it's funded in your operating budget.
It's funded.
Yeah.
It's
You'll see the
funded.
total line.
Yeah.
So
Okay,
you
to
won't
answer
see
your
the-
question, it is in the operating budget that was approved.
But it's
But
a
it's
line,
back
but this
up.
is what we give to the commissioner, this is what we give to the budget department, and then from there, they just cut a number out, and then I have to decide, well, how many am I gonna do?
Well, for example, the Chevy trucks, would they be bonded for or no?
No,
No.
we would, it's part of the budget.
And they would also come through Public Works, because we help them with the fleet management. There's a lot of specialty equipment out here, and we help them with that, everything, we're going to all hybrids, or
And don't other departments, however, do in fact, Public Works, if they buy a bunch of trucks or buses for the transportation or whatever, those are bonded for, aren't they?
Above a certain amount.
What's not funded by other agencies, yes. Yes, it's usually a cost share with this equipment also. We have the FAA give us money on some of the de-icing equipment, some of the electric tows that we use out here, and whatever is not, that's what we'll.
It's
Right.
equipment above a
Some of the
certain
equipment that
Right.
we have, the heavy equipment, that goes out of capital, and you guys approve that. So it's separate, but these are what the budget department says that we can buy, so I get cut, well, maybe I'm only buying one pickup truck this year. And that's one of the reasons that, one of the things we do is we keep our equipment in pristine shape, because of the fact that we can offset these things. The biggest thing is that our equipment looks really great. And the reason it looks really great, it doesn't drive on roads, it drives on the airport, but the amount of hours that are on the truck, even though it says 20,000 miles, 30,000 miles, the realistic number on those trucks are over 100,000 miles. Because they're idling a lot, they're running 24 hours a day, and they're also making circles. They don't really drive straight for very long. And so we will go through a lot of tires, so a lot of expenses for those things that are not normal to, let's say, a county vehicle. So this is that was just a quick synopsis of it. It's more involved, and that's why we invite you if you want to come or you want to have a special presentation where you can sit down and drill down the numbers like what we received from the board and the questions. We'd be happy to do that. It's just a lot easier and have more clarity to give you the right answers. Go ahead, Ron.
Yeah. So Peter Schlachtis had forwarded you questions,
Mhm.
because you received them.
Do we have them?
I have that. This would be the wrong time to get to those questions, do you think?
Yeah, what I'd like to do is, what's hard about it is that sometimes it's almost like it's hard to answer the question because we're not quite sure what you're asking us. And what I'd rather have is sit down and go through.
I could not agree more about how you have a productive conversation.
So that's what I would like to do. Is that whenever you're ready, you tell us when you want to do it, and you can do it in groups if you like, you know? So it doesn't matter, but Hal and I are at your disposal to actually go through that and drill down on what you need to know and what you'd like to know about the airport budget, because it is a public budget. Go ahead, Rob. Oh, sorry.
So you're proposing to have those conversations away from the formal meetings?
Yeah,
You're inviting people to.
Yeah, just
to
come
sit
to my
up?
office
Okay.
and that way it's easier than to try to punch through some things that, because we were, Hal was answering some of the questions and we have some of the answers. But again, we want to make sure that the question is asked the right way and that we're actually answering the question properly.
I just wanted to make sure people understood
Yeah.
exactly. I did it. On the $935,000 budget request, I assume you only put stuff in that when you carve it down to 500, do you feel that there are things in there that have to have things that
There are certain
we don't
things
get?
that they have to have, but see, I've been doing this a long time. I know the first place that the budget department goes to cut. So the thing is that I know that I'm gonna have to offset some equipment. So I always ask for more than I'm gonna get.
You're not supposed to say that.
Yeah.
The budget director is actually.
So, but no, we have a good relationship because if they do cut
No, the
something-
budget department is fair. If you
Yes.
have a need, and it's especially life safety, you might have to transfer it from another, account out here to meet the zero balance they're always looking for, but.
Yeah.
We're not gonna do anything that's not life safety or
No,
what's not
we
necessary.
would never allow it anyway.
Right.
Because we do meet with them, and if we have to, if I said, look, you really can't cut me here, this is the reason why,
Right.
they'll restore it. But we know that, hey, I don't need to, I'd like to replace 3 pickup trucks, but I know we keep them well maintained. I know that if I replace one that year, fine, I'll ask for 2 next year.
And a lot would loosen up in the fourth quarter once you have the other revenues in too. So
Yeah.
the equipment, maybe they denied in April, maybe they'll improve in October.
And also, if I did have a problem with equipment and I overspent my equipment budget, I would go to them and say, can I draw money from another account that we're not spending?
Right.
And they give me permission to do it.
That's kind of, my question is, given that we have $23 million right now, is that money, why wouldn't we use that money to fill your budget, your equipment budget request?
Oh, we could if we needed to. But right now, I try to work in the parameters of what I'm given. And let's say we have a disaster and tons of taxiways are broken and I know that I'm not gonna make my budget. I can ask for a budget amendment. I need to a budget amendment, or I draw a special revenue account.
So, but for you to draw the special revenue account, you need the permission of.
Correct.
Budget director.
The budget director, commission, yeah.
Okay, so it's not
The
there.
request goes through me, but it's his call.
That's why I said I control the airport budget, but the budget controls me.
I want people to understand how the process
Yeah.
works, because there is a lot of money here we've got a lot of work to do. I just-
And then again, the audit is the big thing, is we go, there's a 2-week audit that we go through. And, they literally sit in my office, and Hal works with them hand in hand, and they ask questions. We have to be accountable for every dollar we spend. And they'll ask questions, why did you spend this, why did you spend that, why did you not spend this? So, these are things that we have to be accountable for.
There's Michael and then Wade.
So I saw in one of the slides, Peter, that you do have the ability to establish reserves.
Yes.
So you talked about having the $23 million or so in your surplus account, is that what you called it?
Yeah.
Is that what you would consider, is that what you would consider reserves?
That's, you would consider reserve.
And are any of those separated by category or earmarked for certain projects? Or
Just a pile of cash.
It's just one general fund?
One general fund, and it's cash, and again, it's a reserve, it's a rainy day account. I mean, think about it this way, what happens if I had a catastrophic event on the runway? And we had to come in immediately and spend $3 million. We go right and say, we gotta spend it. Here's our cash reserve.
And you mentioned, though, the budget is, very detailed and obviously numbers assigned to different line items. But you mentioned there is flexibility to move things between the line items, or you need budget director approval?
We have to get budget approval. So in other words, and we have to be accountable. Well, how come you did, they ask a question, how come you pulled down on this account? How come you didn't budget properly? It's not a matter of budget properly, we didn't anticipate spending this much because we have to put in a security, because of something happened in the world today, and all of a sudden I have to hire 20 police officers, or I have to get a whole bunch of security cameras. I only anticipated $100,000, but all of a sudden, the world changed. and we have to change. So we may draw out of another account to keep it whole and not spend and do that project this year. We'll wait till next year. So again, those are decisions that are made, and we do that with the budget department to make those decisions.
You had something to add to what?
Yeah, I just, as far as the fund balance, the rule of thumb that we follow, that was decided upon, is that the fund balance should be 40% of our operating expenses. We consider that to be safe in case of an emergency. As far as transferring accounts, there are certain rules that the county has us follow. Like, we can't transfer from a 300 account, which are like supplies and all that, to a 400 account. It has to be within certain specifications. So, you know, and as far as the audit, it's very, very detailed. You know, they go through all our receipts, all our deposits. One year, since I've been here, I've been doing this for 17 years, and 1 year they wrote us up for not depositing a $5 check on time. So we had to go through this whole thing at a meeting, explain why we didn't and all that, and then everything was okay.
How much money was spent auditing?
Yeah. No, we've been lucky. We've had good audits.
Go through all costs to save money.
And one other thing with Peter, he keeps stressing that we invite you guys to come and ask us questions, because an airport is a little different than a normal. You know, I worked for IBM, and like a fund balance would be called retained earnings. You know, but there's different rules here, and a lot of the questions that we got, that I've answered most of them. A lot of these questions wouldn't have even come up if you had gone to see how we do things, you know, and how things work. And I think it would be very useful, you know, for you guys.
Appreciate that, thank you.
And anytime.
My question is about the audit. You say you get audited in March. Is that for just 3 months, or is that for the past?
That's for the whole year.
For the whole year.
So in other words, right now, Hal and his group are winding down 2019. They're winding down.
Yeah, the
We
previous
still,
year.
we still go into 2 months or so of paying bills that are booked against 2019. So in March, he's about ready to take an audit.
Okay.
By that time, we've really pretty much closed the books on 2019, so we're ready to do an audit. So they come in and they drill down on our budget, you know, and like I said, $5, you cash it right away. So those are what they look for. They look for where are the obvious things, and we always get a glowing report, and that's, you know, thanks to Hal. You know, he keeps me out of jail. Keep myself out.
Yeah, Hal, you indicated that, you know, I said in a prior life you worked for IBM, and this would be called retained earnings. So this fund balance is not a segregated fund. I was under the impression that it was. This is not your operating account. This is just.
No, it's just, like Pete said, it's a
It's a book
savings.
entry, really.
Yes.
It's not a dedicated fund.
No.
Okay, it's really a book entry, in effect.
And there's different things, like for instance, when we spend PFC money, you can't book it as revenue or money you're taking in until you spend it. And the feds have different rules too, so there's also different rules on how they do it. And the auditors pick up on that also, how it's booked, and they explain that. We actually had one where we explained that, because we actually had O'Connor Davies give an explanation to the board, probably, I think it was October or August, of how viable the airport is financially.
Is this liquid? I mean, how are you're booking this as, you know, retained earnings? I mean, retained earnings is not necessarily kept in a private company in the form of cash. I mean,
No, but, well, see, it's, here it is. It's in an account. It earns interest, very, very little. So it is it's a savings account.
If you ever think of investing in county general revenue funds?
Yeah.
Just one point about the audit. To qualify for federal grants, we actually have to provide copies of the county's audits to the granting agencies. So the federal government and others really want to see that the funds are being spent as they are supposed to be. So that's one of the, you know, purposes of getting the audit.
Just to add in on Norman, the federal government also prints on Form 127, which auditors basically submit to the federal government. They actually prepare a Form 127, which you can go online and look up any airport. It gives a whole balance on everything that the federal government basically earmarks. And a lot of the airlines will go to those financial reports to determine cost per passenger enplanement and to look at the debt service of an airport. And that sometimes is a decision whether they come to an airport or not. based on that financial spreadsheet.
We had a member of the public any questions, so
Yes,
no objection.
member of the public, Linda Bronner from Yonkers. Thank you for all your presentation. It's quite enlightening. If this is an inappropriate question, it can be tabled for another time if it's a lengthy answer. But I'm very concerned, well, I'm very curious to know when a decision is made to take a grant of money from the FAA. Because when the airport does so, we're then under the thumb of the FAA to a large extent.
Yeah. When an airport takes a federal grant, they're obligated for 20 years under that grant. So in other words, basically what it means is that you have certain criteria that you have to follow. One, you have to maintain it as an airport, you have to meet federal standards, and you also have to, you can't sell land, you can't sell off equipment. There's a lot of things you have to, and also rates and charges are important under the grants.
Yeah, okay, that's the reason I asked the question, because it does curtail your ability to function, for instance, to make money, as you had said before. We have to be careful, we can't have to make money.
Right.
Well, what if we decide we want to be independent of the FAA to the largest extent possible, and therefore we want to accumulate money by charging rates or whatever?
What you do is you have to pay back all the grants, and you
Do we have any outstanding?
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Ah,
So
okay.
you have to pay it all back, and that's difficult. Like, for instance, they closed a small airport in California, the name eludes.
Santa Monica.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they had to pay
Closed
back
it.
all the grants. And you know who paid back the grants? Taxpayers.
The taxpayers.
Taxpayers. Now, the thing is, we don't rely on tax levies at this airport. So there's no money from county taxes that go into the airport, we're all self-sustaining. So not many airports can say that, even Teterboro is operates in the red, Port Authority just covers them, so financially, we're in very good shape here at the airport.
So when you do your budget, and it's all, none of that accounts for any of the funds you have from the FAA that you're using currently?
Correct. Yeah, most of the, almost all of the federal grants are under the capital program, which is run by the county and has to be approved by the board of legislators and the county executive's office. Okay. Good questions.
I mean, my understanding is the idea is the fees from the airport, the landing fees, the tenants' rent, et cetera, kind of pays for the running of the airport, but the capital construction projects, the runway that's going to be possibly done, those are where the FAA grants probably comes.
To give you an example, one of the things is that we just put out an airport bulletin on landing fees. And if you read the landing fee thing, we went as far as to say why we increased the landing fees.
Yeah.
That it was related to the runway. It had a justification of why you need to raise fees. If you raise an airline fee, you have to have consultation with all the airlines. You have to justify why you're raising it, what the need is for. You just can't say, you know what, I think this number looks pretty good, so let's just go with that. No, it's not that easy. You have to, rates and charges is the number one thing in your grant assurance, number one. You violate your fees here, first thing you get sued.
And besides the FAA, what other agencies, you just mentioned federal agencies that you are.
We have under the capital program, we usually get 90% of grants money, but we also can get a grant from the state at 5%. So the only thing that's left over that airport's responsible is at 5%. And that's where we use this a lot of times to cash that up. Or they can bond it. But generally, because it's a low number, we cash it up.
I'm just saying, what other agencies besides FAA? You mentioned that's really
that's really it. Just the FAA and federal government.
You say federal government, which, I mean, just.
The FAA.
Sort of like DHS.
Where is the money? He said which bank has the money?
It's in Wells Fargo.
Wells Fargo? And what's the rate of interest that we earn?
Like 1%. Very low.
That's not nothing
Very
these
little.
days. But some people who get on the savings accounts get like buckets.
Just to answer that question, the money that's invested is done by the finance department. And they move the money around to get the most that they can, and then we get told what money was generated from the interest or any investments, and that goes into our budget.
And we try and spread that money around. This guess goes beyond here to banks on Mason, Westchester.
That's the finance.
There's a investment
question.
strategy that the Board of Legislators approves for the finance.
Is that part of, I don't know if you know that.
The Board of Legislators approves it for the county.
Okay.
Like when we
That's not
invested in
specific to
Yonkers
the
Raceway.
No, it's not specific. But it's a public discussion of the Board of Legislators, so that information would be available.
Any questions for Peter? And any members of the public, because this is the last item, that didn't have a chance to ask questions about the... Okay, well, I appreciate...
Sorry,
Oh,
could you
go
just
ahead.
tell us the details of the FAA meeting again, time, date?
I'm gonna, it's the 22nd, I think, but at the location, I would defer to the county.
It's the Newcastle Community Center, Chappaqua, 10 Center Street, 6 p.m. to 8 p.m.
And I believe is it on the website? Is that on the AAB website? Is that mentioned anywhere? I mean, I know it's not strictly speaking in AAB either, but.
It's not a press.
Yeah.
There's
Okay.
no press release from the
Press
county.
release
It is a press, I think, okay, yeah. All right, one last item, I'll reach out to the county as well around future agenda items. I know that we have the master plan items and things, which I'll circulate that back to the board in terms of additional items for future agendas that, issues that the county would like us to provide feedback on. And I'm sure we will, at our next meeting, discuss the FAA meeting and whatever developments have happened on the noise study as well. But in the interest of time, maybe any sort of additional agenda items or something, if we circulate that by email prior to the next meeting and it goes on the agenda, is that fine with everybody? All right, I think we're ready for a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn?
Second. Yes. Okay, thank you. Everyone have a safe drive home. And our next meeting is
February 12th.
February 12th.